How's it going, guys? So this is going to be a little recap. I messed up. I didn't film anything for the beginning of this, and I lost a lot of recording due to some camera issues and my own negligence of not hitting record. So this is just going to be kind of bits and pieces of this Corvette that I built. It's my buddy's drift car. It is done now, but there were some things that happened at the end, so just stay tuned. So starting off here, we're working on the old engine that came out of the car. The replacement LS1 we got actually came with a different oil pan, and we wanted to keep the batwing. So we're stripping that off here and going to be moving that over onto the new engine. This was actually my first time working on an LS. I come from a background in BMWs, so I'm much more familiar with those than these. So right now we're just trying to figure it out. I think the lower pan was like just a bunch of 10 mil bolts, like 13 or something like that, and then one over the back, and then it popped right off. And as we see here, there was a ton of metal and valve stem seat material in the bottom of the pan. She was definitely not in the best of shape. So next step after that was to get the upper oil pan off, I guess is what you'd classify it as. We had some issues with the camera, like I mentioned, so we switched over to my iPhone as my GoPro kept overheating. But we needed to try and get the pickup off of it because the other one had a pickup for the other pan, so it had I believe a rear sump pickup versus this one, which has like a mid pickup. Obviously, it doesn't look like the oil change was very frequent because it was black in there. But good thing is we were just salvaging small parts off of this, so nothing too crazy. But once we got that off, I noticed the pickup had a ton of bearing material in it, so I ended up not using that one, and we ended up getting a replacement one instead. So the GoPro cooled down a little bit. We went ahead and got a little bit wider of an angle when we left the phone over there. Just kind of let this guy run until it had more issues. But now we're trying to strip off the other parts we need off of the new engine, which looked really good on the outside, but the further I got into it, it looked less and less great. We're just getting off all the covers and then stripping off the intake so we can do a few more bits and pieces to it, like checking all the hoses and stuff like that under the intake over that valley cover plate, as well as taking a look at the intake ports underneath everything. I was pretty lucky too. I'm not sure what this came out of. It said a Corvette, but there's a bunch of different plugs on the harness, but everything ends up working in the end. But this harness was in much better shape than the other one. The previous mechanic who owned this car before my buddy did a lot of repairs to it. So we ended up swapping the harness, the engine harness, which I'm glad is a bit easier on this. Here's what was under the intake manifold, which looks significantly worse than the rest of the car. So you never know what you're going to get when you order something online. It looks like they just took a bunch of paint to the outside of the engine and made the outside look pretty in hopes that no one would do this. Tuck it in some rags so I can wipe this up a little bit and pull this off to see everything on the inside. Once again, for never having worked on one of these before, this is a really simple engine to work on. I get why so many people like it. But there's also a lot of things I dislike about it, like needing this plate realistically to pick it up, not having mounting points on the outside of it. Don't really understand why they skip that. So now we're prepping to get the replacement engine on the stand so we can do a bit of work. Like I said, this was originally just supposed to be slapping in the new engine and firing it up so he could go back and get it back on the road drifting. Has been sitting for like 2 years, but we ended up doing a bit more to the engine itself to try and get it just a little bit better and more healthy, and a little bit more things checked and known before we sent it. I was bleeding it a little earlier, so we're still a little warm. I think the oil pressure sensor's bad because it constantly thinks we have 80 psi. Fuel gauge, don't know if it works. I think the battery's finally coming back to life, which is nice. But I think that is a wrap. And now you may be wondering why we went from both engines out of the car with them nowhere near complete to a running clip of the Corvette. It was because of the camera issues I mentioned earlier. I ended up losing pretty much all of the footage, or the footage was unusable, or there was no footage because of some camera issues I had. So, missed all of that on the first round, but we had some more surprises in for us, which you'll see. So now that I had gotten everything all in complete, I was real excited. Everything started up, ran, everything seemed good. All I had to do was just hook up the clutch line, and I thought I had to bleed it. But for those who've worked with the Corvette, they are internal slaves and they are usually pre-filled. And I discovered that there was a waterfall of brake fluid coming out whenever I had pushed in the clutch. And as you can see here in this still, there's the smallest crack on the bleeder line. And since it's internal, it meant everything had to come back out. And honestly, a lot of this was due to my negligence for not, inspecting it or checking it before I put it in. The slave had been disconnected, off of the torque tube. I didn't think anything of it or think to look at it. And obviously, with its location, it gets covered in clutch material pretty easily. So it wasn't until after I had pulled it out, cleaned it off, that I noticed the crack. So we pulled the engine out with the subframe, which my method to do this, thinking it would be easier and save some time, was not easy and did not save any time at all. But we were able to get the engine back out, the slave replaced, and clipped back together. And for anybody who's wondering and trying to do a replacement on this, those quick disconnect lines are awful. They are so difficult to deal with. Best thing I realized you can do, get a pair of channel locks, open them up wide, clip it on both ends, kind of give it a little squeeze, align it with your hand, and then just one small little click and it pops right together. I spent hours trying to do it with every other tool imaginable, and it was a waste of time. And much like when you're putting in any engine, I'm realizing a cart and something to raise up this whole assembly on and off of and move the body away it would have been easier. I unfortunately didn't have anything like that, as I'm still trying to build out my tool set for having the lift. So it was a lot of back and forth. Everybody who's put in an engine solo knows how much of a pain in the ass this can be, of pulling the engine, putting the engine back in, getting it lined up, giving it a little push, having to push it with the hoist, back and forth. But a lot of up and down, back and forth. This ended up taking about 5 hours to do, and a lot of it stemmed from my method of doing it like this instead of just using the carrier plate, as I didn't want to take the intake manifold back off because everything was good. And it was about a 5-hour struggle getting this back in. Definitely use the right tools. These levelers are more useful than you'd imagine. I did end up having to pull the intake back off, even with the subframe out, just to get it lined up onto the torque tube. But it's back out, or back in, and hopefully it will be back together and started here momentarily. And it is back in. I think we're gonna wrap up for tonight though. I don't think I'm gonna get a chance to start this because it is late. But all we got left to do is Get the long tube back in, fill up the clutch, lead the brakes for the extended lines in the wise fab, get this all situated back up, because we have to pull the engine out again. Coolant lines radiator, and she should be ready to go. Hey, it is back together. Hopefully that's the last time I get to take everything off of. And man, would I regret those words. This guy, and we'll be back on. I still need to trim up this hose here to get this back in and fit. And I believe this is a coolant line. I got this car over here taken apart, which is why there's these wonderful stereo wire grounds all over, and I've got to figure out where those go. I think most of them should just go to the block. I've just got to find out where whoever put them in initially decided to set them. But it does work, it does start, so that's all good and dandy. I just need to get the quick disconnect from the master down to the slave we just replaced connected, and I think I'm gonna need to crack the bleeder a little bit just to relieve some of the pressure, because it is almost impossible, I think, to squeeze that together. And then after that, it's bleed the brakes, try and get some final alignments on the wise fab all done, and then she should be out of here soon. And some final stuff a little bit out of order here, but we are going and getting the ECU all back and mounted. This goes on the wheel well. It's kind of odd. And when this showed up, the other module that's in front of it wasn't attached on the outside of the bracket. It was kind of tucked behind. And after putting in the WiseFab kit, I got a little worried that it was going to hit, so I made the executive decision to go ahead and just put it behind again, just to keep it tucked up and out of the way. And now for the final part here. So this went over by quite a bit, just like with any project or project creep. Basically, I needed to get it done and out of here. So I kind of ran out of time to film and just kind of started focusing on getting it taken care of. But the rear main that I replaced in there was just bad. Apparently there's some difference between the harder seals and the softer seals. And the cheap one that we got that I replaced in there did not seal properly, so I ended up pulling that back out, getting the replacement whole rear main plate, and putting that in, which involved not pulling the engine, but it did make for a little extra work, so I ended up having to pull the whole torque tube and the whole rear end again to then replace that plate, clean everything off because there was a bunch of oil, and now it is done and out of there. I didn't get any clips of it driving, unfortunately. I took it around the block as just like my first test drive, but with the WiseFab kit, which I did end up having to cut like a quarter or a half an inch off of each of the tie rods. No matter what I did to adjust it, I couldn't get it to get the toe like close to zero. It was always super towed out. But regardless, it's off. It's going to an alignment shop to get all that taken care of, and then hopefully it will be on the track, and then maybe I'll get some footage then for when I go do a ride along or something with it, just to see how it holds up. But it is done and gone. So I know it's kind of all over the place, and there wasn't really a whole lot of information in it. But we do have another project coming up that is not as much of a rush, and I've been looking forward to once I got this Corvette out. So if you guys like the video, please leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you guys next time.